All right, Boston Bruins. It's going to be an interesting offseason. Let's dive into it. Uh, all right. Starting off with the unrestricted free agents for the Boston Bruins. You got Nick Foligno, cap hit of $3.8 million. Patrice Bergeron, the captain, cap hit of $2.5 million. Tyler Bertuzzi, cap hit of $4.75 million. Tomas Nosek, cap hit of $1.75 million. Garnet Hathaway, cap hit of $1.5 million. Krejci, cap hit of $1 million. Orlov, cap hit of $5.1 million. Connor Clifton, cap hit of $1 million. And then we start to get into the kind of AHL players that could play in the AHL. Chris Wagner, NHL contract, one-way contract, $1.35 million comes off the books. Vinny Lettieri, unrestricted free agent. Kopanen, unrestricted free agent. Anton Strawman, that signed a one-year, $1 million contract. I don't know why. Because when they signed it, he was still the ninth defenseman on the team. Unrestricted free agent. Jack Ashan, unrestricted free agent. Kopanen, Ashan, two prospects of the Bruins at one point that have now hit unrestricted free agency. The Bruins prospect pool grows smaller and less potent than it already was, and it wasn't potent to begin with. We'll dive into that later. Restricted free agents, now we're talking. Trent Frederick, $1.05 million this year. Just about a 20-goal guy. Probably gets a pay raise over that. Jeremy Swayman, $925,000. Definitely gets a pay raise over that. Mark McLaughlin, AHL player, played in the NHL. I guess the rest of the guys. Oscar Steen, restricted free agent, AHL player, played in the NHL. Lauko, AHL player, played in the NHL. We could see him sign to an NHL contract this year, probably at or around league minimum. And the two goaltending prospects you have in the AHL are both restricted free agents, and Brandon Bussey and Kyle Kaiser. Wow, BB and KK. So both of these guys are high potential. You got to find a way to sign these guys and maybe get them into a game throughout the year. Trade clauses. Pastrnak, his extension kicks in with a full no trade clause for several years. Yep. Brad Marchand, 15 no trade list. Taylor Hall, 16 no trade list. Charlie Coyle, 10-team no trade list. Hampus Lindholm, full no trade list. Forbert, a 3-team no trade list. I mean, what's going on there? And Linus Ullmark, full no trade list. So not too bad. You don't really have to get a lot of these guys to waive their no trade lists if you're going to move them. I don't see really any of these guys getting moved except maybe Forbert. But let's talk about it. Others, you still got Mike Riley. Buried contract for the entire year. He's still making $3 million on a one-way contract. Still has 1 year left. Maybe you try to dump his contract off, but you're going to have to pay to dump his contract off, and the Bruins don't have much to pay to dump off a $3 million contract because cap space is at a premium, even more than last year. You're talking about a first or a second round pick to dump that off, which the Bruins don't have. Brandon Carlo could be on the trade block. We'll see. Probably not. Same with Grzelcyk. Could be. Probably not. Grzelcyk is the GM Don Sweeney's boy. He's a hometown guy. Analytically, throughout the regular season, I haven't looked at playoff advanced stats yet, but regular season, he was the 6th/7th best defenseman on the team, including, and that's right there with Derek Forbert, who's also on this list. 1 year, $3 million. We're seeing a theme here. You also got Zaboro, who's there for another year at $1.1 million. Do you play him or do you trade him? Because you got to trade a defensive player. You have to clear up some cap space. You just have to. And you got AJ Greer, who could be one of those pieces thrown into a trade, maybe as a sweetener. Maybe you're looking to dump off Riley's contract. You bundle in a third-round pick and AJ Greer, an NHL-ready defenseman, to someone like the Coyotes. The Coyotes play Greer on like their third line. Greer scores like 15 goals, and all of a sudden they can flip him for a profit. We've seen teams do that. You got to throw in a sweetener there. If you're going to get rid of the Riley contract, and maybe the Forbert contract, that's a little more tradable because he's a defensive specialist. But Don Sweeney's got to start making some moves to clear up cap space, and we'll get into that. But for now, players to keep: David Pastrnak, little star asterisk, whatever it is. I don't even remember what that is, nor can I tell what it is. Sign an extension. Marchand, I don't know why I had that there. Marchand, perhaps the next captain, in my opinion, probably should be the next captain of the Bruins. Taylor Hall, I don't know. You're going to be a little stretched. You're going to lose a lot of these top 6 players in free agency. Taylor Hall, does he then become a top 6 forward? You have Zacha, who's probably going to play second line center. You move Taylor Hall up, Zacha, Pastrnak, and Hall on that second line. So I don't really know if you should be trading Taylor Hall. I say you keep him, so I have him on this side, but he could be one of those players to go. $6 million contract. We'll see. Charlie Coyle. I think you have to explore trading Charlie Coyle, even if you lose Bergeron and Krejci. Charlie Coyle is nothing more than a third line center. That's been established. That was established last year. Again, that was shown this year. When Bergeron and Krejci were being scratched, Charlie Coyle is a third-line center and nothing more. $5.25 million for a good third-line center. Maybe, if I was GM, I would consider trading him. I would have been considering trading him a few years ago. Nonetheless, Don Sweeney's boy, he's gonna be kept. He's gonna stick around. Pavel Zacha got an extension. We don't usually see players traded once they've received an extension. So that's Pastrnak and Zacha. Charlie McAvoy, also in contention to be the next captain. Perennial Norris caliber defenseman. I thought he had a fairly down year last year, and I know he was rated high in the Norris conversation because he played all 82 games and he threw up points, but his defensive game I didn't think was as good last year as it has been. This year I think he was one of the best defensemen in the league. 200 feet, 200 foot of the ice. He played great, excellent hockey in his own zone, and he was putting up points at almost a point per game as a defenseman. I think one of the best, if not the best, two-way defenseman in the game today, at least this past year. Come at me with that. Don't throw Quinn Hughes in my face because that's not a comparison, because Quinn Hughes is a lot worse defensively in his own zone, as are other players. Like Cale Makar. Come at me. Hampus Lindholm, I think you got to keep him. He's got that no-trade clause anyway. You gave up a lot to keep Lindholm. You extended him. This was his first year of the extension. He was a Norris favorite through the first few months. Obviously, it wasn't sustainable. Clearly, that's shown out not to be sustainable. But he's still one of your best defensemen. You keep him. And Swayman, homegrown guy. I think he stays. He seems to be comfortable in high-pressure situations coming off the bench. He's very versatile. He gives it back to players that are maybe abusing the goaltender a little more than they should. I like Swayman. Again, restricted free agent, going to Command Monday. Ullmark has a full no-movement clause, and Ullmark has a lot of reason to stay in Boston in his personal life. Swayman might be a trade candidate. We'll see. Especially with two prize goalie prospects in Bussy and Kaiser. I don't think Swayman gets traded this year. I don't think he gets traded at all. I think they keep him. I think he's part of the future, part of the core. But you also have a Vezina caliber goalie as your number one. Do you need a top 10 goalie as your number two? And Swayman's got top 10 goalie potential, if not already accomplished that. So there are questions to be had. This should be an interesting offseason for the Boston Bruins. Again, let's get back into the picks. No first-round pick, no second-round pick. They have a third and a fourth. That's great. No fifth-round pick. They have a sixth, and they have 2 sevenths. Not a whole lot of potential there to hit on something. Third round, you're kind of grasping at straws to get an NHL player. And beyond that, it's kind of a crapshoot. So not a whole lot in terms of the future pipeline from this draft. They also don't have a first, second, or third round pick next season as well. And then the year after that, they're already out their second and fourth round pick. They do have their first, though. Keep in mind their first round pick for next year is top 10 protected. So if the Bruins get a top 10 pick, that'll be deferred to 2025. But if the Bruins get a top 10 pick, it's likely that in 2025 that might also be a top 10 pick, because that means they're not very good and they have a lot of expensive long-term contracts. So hopefully that's not the case. We'll see. Cap space, including the $4.5 million in penalties. Cap Friendly updated it, so I didn't even have to do the math this time. That's fantastic. They have a little over $6 million, $6.087 million in cap space. That's pennies for what they need. That is pennies. Yeah. $4.5 million in penalties. Those were bonuses given out to Bergeron and Krejci. Last season, they were like, one of them was like, play 10 games. Which, if you're playing a full season, you hope that player plays 10 games. And they're the bonuses. They affect the cap this year. What do they need? They need a goalie. They have Ullmark. And then they have Swayman, Bussy, Kaiser, DiPietro. It's 4 goalies that are restricted free agents at this point. They need, at the very least, a backup NHL caliber goaltender. So they got to spend money there. 0 to 1 defenseman. What do you do with Mike Riley? That's kind of the 0 to 1. 0, if Mike Riley plays, great. If he doesn't, you can sign a league minimum contract to take that spot. Is a league minimum player going to play as well, if not better, than Mike Riley? Personally, I'd say no. We'll see. So keep in mind, this is the cap space after all of the unrestricted and restricted free agents have not been signed. They're all off the books. That factors into this. So they have $6 million to sign all these players if they want the same team back, which is impossible. They also need 6 forwards to fill out their roster. And I did this with 2 goaltenders, 7 defensemen, 13 forwards. So in total, they need 7 to 8 players, depending on if Mike Riley plays in the NHL this year or is an AHL player. Mike Riley, as a buried contract, is still $2.2-ish million off the books. You can add that to the penalties if you want, however you want to sort it out in your brain. So you need every player that you're going to sign essentially to take a league minimum contract, and you have to trade out money. Let me do some math real quick, actually. Calculator. 750,000 times, we'll say 7. So you sign 8 players at 750,000. I think the league minimum goes up this year too. So you're really flirting with. You got to trade someone out to make the cap work. The newbies we could see in the lineup, you got Fabian Lysell. I'm sorry it gets a little cut off here, and Merkulov, and both have been great in the AHL. They're really the only 2 skating prospects. You have Bussy as well, who played well in net. Kaiser also as a goalie, but we'll see. I'd expect to see Lysell and or Merkulov this season for the Boston Bruins. Obviously, we'll see how they are in training camp. But almost every other player in the AHL for the Providence Bruins was at or below a half point per game, including Lauko, Steen, McLaughlin. Some of these guys you've seen play in an NHL uniform. Kopanen, Sean, who's a defenseman. Offensive defenseman, though. Still not putting up great offensive numbers in the AHL. Vinny Lettieri, right? So the Bruins prospect pool is weak, and it's getting worse. With people on unrestricted free agent contracts that may sign elsewhere for a better opportunity, an opportunity to actually play in the NHL. The standard in Boston is to make the playoffs every year and win a couple rounds in the playoffs every year. With this list of players lost, the amount of cap space and what they can do with that, it's going to be a real tough case to make to be a contending team. Maybe a fringe playoff team, I think. The big thing is no top two centers on this team. Bergeron, Krejci, probably gone. Probably still can't afford either of those players if they want to come back. You'll have to make space to make them come back because they're both going to come back on a deal below market value, and those are needs. Those are needs for the Bruins. You need top two centermen. You have Zacha. Is he any better than Eric Haula in that center position last year? No, he's about the same. You can look and compare at the stats, but that trade's worked out pretty well for both teams. The Haula versus Zacha straight up. Haula's stats are down a lot, yes, in New Jersey, but the value he adds to that team and his playoff performance is exceptional. He adds a lot of experience to that team. He adds a lot of the intangibles that Zacha didn't possess. Right. It's worked out for both teams. Zacha, probably the second line center next year. Is he better than Haula at the second line center position? My argument would be no. We'll see. They still don't have a top line center. Who's going to fill in that role? Is it going to be Coyle? There are questions to be had. So, I don't know. It was boom or bust this year for the Bruins. They busted, and that's kind of it. They sold their future, the next few years off, to be legitimate contenders to win a cup this year. Now, here's kind of my 2 cents with that. I think, for me, watching the Bruins, a lot of my concerns I had coming into the playoffs with the Bruins were addressed except for one glaring one. Now, I do want to highlight that David Pastrnak was great. I had a lot of concerns about his defensive game. He's an offensive forward, and he's always been that way, and he's very good at it. But he would still provide some defense when need be in seasons leading up to this. This season, he was awful defensively. He was awful. He was not playing at an NHL level. He wasn't even present in the defensive zone most of the time. He wasn't good. It just is what it is. The playoffs, though, he played a 200-foot game, and he played very good in his defensive zone. And I wasn't expecting to see that from Pastrnak, but he did that, and it was impressive. And, that's the guy that's getting... To me, he's showing worth in his contract that he just signed by playing that complete 200-foot game while putting the puck in the net. And that's what he did in the playoffs, and it was great. Threw a lot of shade at Pastrnak this year. I don't have any shade to throw with him in the playoffs. I think he was great. Marchand played exceptional in the playoffs. I think best he's played all season was in the playoffs. Taylor Hall stepped up in the playoffs. Charlie McAvoy, I thought, played pretty well. Threw some hits, played pretty well defensively. There were some instances where his probably should have been pulled off that lead point in the power play in games 6 and 7. You could even make the argument in game 5. For me, it comes down to coaching and the lack of adjustments. All season, we never really saw Jim Montgomery make in-game adjustments because he didn't have to. He'd make pre-game adjustments and change up the lines, and that was great. But those lines would stay pretty consistent or revert back to his usual lines throughout the game. And you kind of knew within the first few minutes if he was going to revert back to the regular lines or keep the new lines throughout the whole game. He only did that because players were hurt, and players were getting rested going into the playoffs. He was kind of forced to do that. We didn't see any adjustments in the playoffs from Montgomery. We saw one game where Marchand started the game on the third line. That lasted 6 minutes into the game, and lines were back where they were, and it benefited the team in no way, shape, or form. That's my concern with the Bruins, is their coach and their lack of adjustment. Now, Montgomery's great. He brings a lot of positivity to that locker room, which is needed. Jake DeBrusk plays very well under Montgomery. A lot of these players play well. Clifton, DeBrusk, their games have been elevated under Montgomery. Taylor Hall, I think, has played very well under Montgomery. A lot of these players have played well under the coach. But when it comes to the playoffs, it becomes more of a coaching battle. And Montgomery got out coached by the Florida Panthers coach, Paul Maurice. And I don't have a very high opinion of Paul Maurice. I don't think he's a great coach, but he outcoached Montgomery. He made in-game adjustments in the playoffs. We saw Bruce Cassidy last year against the Carolina Hurricanes make adjustments in the game because he had to. He did get outcoached by Brind'Amour, which, all the respect to Brind'Amour, because Brind'Amour is a very good coach. I hate Brind'Amour, but he's a very good coach. But nonetheless, Bruce Cassidy made it to the second round this year and has been making adjustments with that Vegas team that doesn't have the lineup that the Bruins had this year. He's in the second round. And this first round wasn't super easy. So, a little food for thought there. I also do want to say Cassidy, do I think there were some players that may have been stifled a bit under him? Yes. But if he was the Bruins coach this year, with the roster that they had, is there a potential that Cassidy could have also set the single season record as Montgomery did? And then could the Bruins may have seen a little more playoff success? That's not an answer we'll ever get to have. But it's fun to speculate. It's fun to kind of compare. We're really going to see what Montgomery's made of next year if Bergeron and Krejci are out and no other first-line center or second-line center comes into the organization. Montgomery is going to need to make adjustments game to game, week to week. He's also going to start to need to make in-game adjustments. We'll see if he's capable of that this next year. He's a Jack Adams finalist for Coach of the Year. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins it. You can make a case for all three guys nominated this year. Montgomery will be back next year. It's that simple. But the Bruins losing in the first round came to being outcoached. It's that simple. I don't think there's any way around it. You can look at certain players who produced, who didn't. But for the most part, up and down the lineup, I thought players produced pretty well. It was just there were no adjustments. The matchups, he wasn't adjusting to different matchups. I don't know. So I appreciate you. Let me know what you think. If you want me to explain more about the Bruins playoff loss, I'll be happy to do a video on that. Do you think anyone gets traded out? Who do you think comes back? And if so, how do they fit their needs under the cap space? It's already going to be tight. You have all these players you need to sign, taking literally league minimum contracts. Can you fit that under the cap? What happens from here? How does next season look? There's a lot of questions with this team now, and it's coming down to crunch time for Don Sweeney to figure it out. He's already had a week or so. Wow. Time flies. He's already had a week into free agency for him to re-sign the players he needs to sign. He hasn't made any moves as of yet. Zacha and Pastrnak were signed mid-season, towards the end of the season. They were signed during the season. It's free agency. You got to start planning for the future. See what we'll see. It's going to be really interesting. What is this? I've done 2 teams now. I might keep doing these. Let me know if you guys like these. You want me to keep doing these. It's fun for me to look at, so I might just do more. But I appreciate your thoughts. Appreciate you watching too. And take care.